I want you to try something right now, like right out of the gate here. Wherever you are listening to this, whatever you are doing, I want you to literally reach out and tap something solid.
Just go ahead and do it.
Seriously,
Oh.
actually do it. If you're driving, tap the leather of your steering wheel. If you're sitting at work, tap the wooden desk in front of you. Or even, just clap your hands together to make a sudden, sharp sound.
Right.
Notice that physical sensation. Feel that undeniable resistance pushing back against your skin. Listen to the way that sudden noise violently breaks the ambient silence of the room,
Yeah, it's a very distinct feeling.
It really is. And in that exact fraction of a second, your brain is doing something incredibly specific. It registers a definitively binary state of reality. It tells you there's a strict, uncrossable border.
Like a hard line.
Exactly. Your hand ends, the desk begins. The silence ends, the noise begins. It's clean. It's measurable.
And, it is the most fundamental way we experience the world, right? And it feels completely unassailable. When your hand hits that wood, there is zero doubt in your mind that you are interacting with a discrete, independent object.
Zero doubt. I mean, it feels like ultimate truth. We crave that stark black and white contrast. Think about looking at a medical x-ray on a light board. You go to the doctor with a hurt arm. You don't want a philosophical discussion about the nature of the bone.
No, definitely not.
You want the doctor to point to a thick, jagged white line and say, broken or not broken. We build our entire psychological framework around a universe that is neatly categorized into these rigid, independent opposites. My hand, the desk, broken, whole, safe, dangerous.
We do. And we don't just do this because we are stubborn or, unimaginative. The biological reality is that our nervous systems did not evolve to ponder the metaphysical fluidity of the cosmos.
Right. They evolved to keep us from getting eaten.
Exactly. They evolved to keep us alive on the savannah. To survive, the mammalian visual cortex had to become highly specialized in a computational process known as edge detection.
Edge detection, meaning like finding the exact boundary where one thing ends and another begins.
Yeah, precisely. We spend an enormous amount of caloric energy processing contrast, light, and shadow just to define the boundary of an object. If you are a primitive human navigating a highly dangerous environment, you cannot afford to view the world as a seamless, interdependent tapestry.
You'd be lunched.
You'd be lunched, yeah.
Yeah.
If there is a predator crouching in the tall grass, your brain must instantly draw a hard, absolute boundary between the concept of tiger and the concept of grass. The tiger is dangerous, the grass is not. You physically must force reality into strict dualities to react quickly enough to survive.
So this binary edge detection keeps us alive biologically. It is an evolutionary superpower. But the sources we are looking at today argue that this exact survival mechanism creates a profound psychological condition. They refer to it as the disease of reification.
Reification. It's the process of taking something that is inherently fluid, abstract, or interdependent and mentally freezing it into a solid, absolute, independent thing.
Okay, wait, break that down for me.
Sure. So because our brain detects an edge between our hand and the desk, we automatically assume that our hand and the desk exist as completely absolute, independent entities out in the universe, totally cut off from each other.
We freeze a fluid, interconnected reality into isolated blocks.
We do. And when we do that, we end up suffering.
Because reality isn't actually frozen.
Right. We cling to these frozen ideas, the idea of a permanent self, a permanent job, a permanent relationship, and when the universe inevitably proves that it is fluid, when things change, age, or break, we experience massive anxiety. We feel like reality itself is betraying us.
But the world isn't betraying us. Our biological edge detection is just giving us a highly edited, heavily filtered map of a territory that doesn't actually have any permanent borders.
That's a great way to put it. The map is not the territory.
Which brings us to the core mission of today's deep dive. We are taking that comfortable, solid reality you just tapped, that entire biological framework of edge detection, and we are putting it under the ultimate philosophical microscope.
A very, very powerful microscope.
A microscope so incredibly powerful that the rigid boundaries you rely on every single day are going to completely devolve. Today, we are stepping into the mind of the 2nd century Indian philosopher Nāgārjuna.
Yeah, and we are focusing specifically on his absolute masterpiece, the Madhyamaka Logical, or the MMK. It is widely considered one of the most formidable works of logic in human history.
It's intimidating, honestly.
It can be. To be precise, we are looking at Chapter 4, which targets the composition of physical reality using a very specific, incredibly rigorous diagnostic tool known as Madhyamaka Logical Reasoning. We're going to walk through this in 11 steps today.
And I want to be totally upfront with you. This isn't an abstract intellectual puzzle. Nāgārjuna isn't trying to just win a debate or, like, show off his rhetorical skills. This text is a spiritual diagnostic tool.
Yeah.
By systematically deconstructing the very building blocks of your reality, we are aiming to cure the anxiety and suffering caused by your addiction to solid objects and frozen concepts. We are going to dismantle the X-ray machine itself.
It is a radical, almost surgical treatment. But before a surgeon can remove an illness, they have to properly identify the anatomy, right?
Step one, we need to know what we're looking at.
Exactly. What exactly is our mind slicing into pieces? We need to define these building blocks. In the philosophical framework of the MMK, the conventional components of human experience are categorized into 5 aggregates, or skandhas.
Okay, so the word aggregate implies a collection of things. So when I look at myself in the mirror, my visual cortex tells me I am just one solid inherent me. But Nāgārjuna says I am actually a composite. I am a collection.
A collection of collections, really.
So what are these 5 collections?
They cover the entirety of your existence. First, there is form. This is the physical stuff. Your body, the biological matter, the desk you just tapped.
Okay, physical form. Got it.
Second is feeling. And we don't mean complex emotions here, but the raw, basic sensations of an experience being pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral.
Like just the fundamental reaction to a stimulus.
Right. Third is perception. This is the recognition and labeling mechanism, the part of the mind that instantly says, that is a desk or that is a hand.
The edge detector.
Yes, exactly. Fourth is mental formations. This is the complex stuff, your intentions, your habits, your biases, the intricate psychological reactions you have to the world.
My personality, basically.
Basically. And fifth is consciousness, the raw underlying awareness that cognizes all of these events as they happen.
So form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. We instinctively treat these as the solid, independent pillars of our identity. I mean, I feel like I am my body and I am my thoughts.
We all do.
But Nāgārjuna suggests that the way our mind constructs reality involves an implicit, almost invisible assumption about how these building blocks work. When I look at a physical object, let's take the aggregate of form, like a wooden chair, my mind automatically divides the situation into 3 distinct spheres.
This is a crucial part of step 1, the triad of composition. It is a brilliant observation of human psychology. Our minds cannot process a complex object without implicitly generating this 3-part model.
Walk us through the triad.
Okay, so the first sphere represents the parts. These are the invisible, irreducible basic elements, or the causes. In ancient terms, they might call them earth, water, fire, and wind. Today, we might say atoms or, wood and nails.
The raw materials.
Right. The second sphere is the action, the relation of composing, aggregating, or causing.
The verb. The doing.
Yes. And the third sphere is the whole, the visible aggregate, the final effect itself, the physical chair.
Parts, the act of composing, and the whole... Okay, wait, hold on. I have to play skeptic here for a second.
You do.
If I build a chair in my garage, the wood and the nails are right there on my workbench. I hammered them. My thumbs are bleeding. The chair is sitting right there. If I leave the room, the chair doesn't disappear. It holds my weight when I sit on it.
Sure.
So how can Nāgārjuna possibly look at my bleeding thumb and the physical chair and call this triad a delusion?
A vital distinction has to be made here, or the entire philosophy sounds like absolute madness. Your bleeding thumb is real. The chair holding your weight is real. Nāgārjuna is not denying the conventional functionality of the chair.
Okay, so he's not saying I can walk through walls.
No, not at all. He's not saying the wood doesn't exist in a practical, everyday sense. What he is attacking is the hidden assumption your mind makes about the nature of that existence. He is attacking the belief in absolute, inherent existence.
Meaning my mind secretly believes the chair has a frozen chairness inside of it.
Yes. When you leave the garage, your biological edge detection forces you to assume that the chair possesses a standalone frozen essence that exists totally independent of the wood it is made from, independent of the carpenter who built it, independent of the gravity holding it to the floor, and independent of your mind labeling it a chair.
We just assume it's a chair all on its own.
Exactly. We believe the whole has an absolute essence. We believe the parts have an absolute essence. And we believe the action of composing is an independent force linking them. Nāgārjuna argues that if you look closely at these 3 spheres, none of them possess a single shred of independent absolute reality.
And to prove that they don't have that independent reality, Nāgārjuna subjects these 3 spheres to an ultimate logical stress test, This is step 2. The core machinery of the philosophy. We run the parts, the action, and the whole through a four-cornered logic gate known as the tetralemma.
The tetralemma is fascinating. Classical Western logic, dating back to Aristotle, primarily operates on a dilemma. Two horns, true or false, A or B.
Right, binary.
But Indian logic introduces four corners. It systematically tests every conceivable relationship the mind can possibly construct to see if an absolute independent essence can survive.
Let's run the wooden chair through this four-cornered gate. We're going to test the relationship between the parts, the wood, the nails, the causes, and the whole, the final physical chair.
Okay.
Corner 1 asks, are the parts and the whole entirely different and separate?
And we must follow the logic to its absolute extreme here. If the aggregate of form, the final whole chair, existed inherently separately from its causes, the wood and nails, it would be a causeless effect.
Which makes no sense.
Right. Causeless effects are nowhere to be found in the observable universe. A chair doesn't just spontaneously manifest out of a void. Conversely, if the basic elements, the raw wood, existed entirely independently and separately from the aggregate of the chair, they would be causes without a product. You cannot logically call something a cause if it hasn't caused anything.
So corner 1 is a total dead end. It's like saying the baked chair is totally separate from the raw wood. If they are completely separate, independent entities, the wood has nothing to do with the chair. Where did the chair come from? Magic.
Exactly.
The mind instantly rejects this total separation and runs to corner 2 for safety. Corner 2 asks, are the parts and the whole identical and united? Are they the exact same absolute thing?
If the parts and the whole are mathematically absolutely identical, the distinction between the producer and the product completely collapses. The action of composing disappears entirely.
Because there's no journey from part to whole.
Right. If a pile of raw, unassembled 2x4s is exactly identical to the finished chair, the act of carpentry is an illusion.
Yeah, if my friend comes over and asks for a seat, and I just point to a pile of raw timber and some loose screws on the floor, they're going to look at me like I'm crazy. Functionally and absolutely, the parts are not the identical same thing as a whole. You can't sit on a pile of loose wood.
So identity fails just as hard as separation.
So the parts and the whole aren't completely separate, but they also aren't exactly identical.
Yeah.
This creates a psychological panic, pushing people to corner 3. Are they both identical and separate?
This is where people often retreat when they feel their philosophical ground slipping. Well, it's a bit of both. They are somewhat the same and somewhat different.
It feels like a safe compromise.
It does, but in rigorous logic, combining two broken bridges does not magically build a stable one. It is a direct logical contradiction to claim that something is entirely, inherently separate and perfectly, inherently identical at the exact same time. You are merely stacking fallacies.
It's like arguing that a shape is absolutely a perfect square and absolutely a perfect circle simultaneously. It just breaks the brain. You can't hide in corner 3.
No, you can't.
So difference fails, identity fails, both fails. That leaves us with the final corner, corner 4. Are the parts and the whole neither identical nor different?
To claim they are neither identical nor different is to deny functional reality entirely. If there is no relationship of difference and no relationship of identity, we are left in absolute nihilism.
Meaning what exactly?
You are essentially saying that causes don't relate to effects at all, that carpentry doesn't exist, that chairs don't exist, that the physical world is a complete and utter hallucination with no rules. It removes the entire discussion from all conceptual grounding.
Wow. I am feeling the panic Nāgārjuna intends for the reader here. We just ran our wooden chair, and by extension, the very biological cells of our physical form, through this four-cornered gate.
The stress test.
If the parts that make me up and the whole that is me aren't separate, aren't identical, aren't both, and aren't neither, then what am I? If the tetralemma systematically destroys all 4 logical extremes, leaving us grasping at empty air, does that mean nothing exists?
And this brings us to steps 3 and 4. This is the critical pivot of the entire philosophy. We are absolutely not left with nihilism. Because the tetralemma definitively proves that absolute, independent, inherent relationships are impossible, we must conclude that the 3 spheres, the parts, the action of composing, and the wholes are empty of inherent existence.
Empty.
Yes, this is the ultimate truth, known in Sanskrit as shunyata.
Emptiness. But we have to be incredibly careful with that word, right? To a modern ear, emptiness sounds like a dark, depressing void. It sounds like a giant, meaningless vacuum where nothing matters.
That is the most dangerous and common misinterpretation of Madhyamaka philosophy. Emptiness does not mean non-existence. It simply means a lack of inherent independent essence. Because things are empty of an independent essence, they are entirely dependently co-arisen.
Dependently co-arisen.
This is the conventional truth. Things only exist in mutual dependent relation to one another.
Dependent co-arising. Let me try to ground this with an analogy that isn't physical matter. Let's look at the concept of a parent and a child.
Oh, that's a classic one.
You cannot have the inherent absolute identity of a parent just floating around in a void. A human being is not inherently a parent. The identity of the parent is 100% co-defined by the existence of the child.
Right.
The moment the child is born, the parent is simultaneously born as a parent. They rely entirely on each other. The texts say they lean against each other like two sheaves of reeds. If you pull the child away, the concept of the parent instantly collapses.
That illustrates the mechanics perfectly. The aggregate of form only exists in dependence on its parts, and the parts are only defined as parts in dependence on the whole they are composing. They are mutually co-created concepts. They don't exist independently out in the wild, you know. They co-arise.
The brilliance of Nāgārjuna here, and this is step 5, the union of the two truths, is that he doesn't just leave us with these two concepts, emptiness and dependent origination, sitting side by side. He fuses them.
He does.
He argues that the conventional world, the world where we build chairs and raise children, functions flawlessly, specifically because things are ultimately empty of frozen essences.
One truth supports, implies, and enables the other.
Think about how counterintuitive that is. I assume my car works, my desk holds my computer, and my bones support my body specifically because they are solid. I rely on their absolute solidity. I want them to have an unchangeable essence.
Of course you do. But consider the alternative. Let's think about the actual physics of absolute solidity. In Buddhist philosophy, this inherent unchanging essence is called svabhava.
Svabhava.
Yes. If a phenomenon possessed true svabhava, an absolute permanent independent core, it would be completely frozen in time. Let's take a seed and a sprout. If a seed had an absolute unchanging seedness right down to its very core, it could never interact with the soil.
Because it couldn't change.
Exactly. It could never absorb water. It could never mutate, rupture its shell, and become a sprout. It would just be a frozen, eternal seed.
So if my body had absolute svabhava, if it had an unchanging meanness, it could never digest food. It could never heal from a cut. I could never learn a new skill or grow older.
Causality itself requires a lack of boundaries. Emptiness is the necessary breathing room of the universe. It is the profound permeability that allows causality, interaction, and change to happen.
So my desk holds my computer because it's empty.
Yes. Your wooden desk can hold your computer exactly because the desk is made of causes and conditions, wood, screws, atomic bonds, moisture levels, all of which are fluid and interacting. If the desk were a singular, absolute, unchangeable entity, you couldn't even touch it without breaking its absolute nature. The conventional appearance of the world is only possible because of its ultimate emptiness.
That completely flips the X-ray comfort upside down. We thought we needed the solid white line to feel safe, but if the solid white line actually existed, the universe would be a frozen, dead photograph.
Exactly. It would be entirely static.
But this realization pushes us into some deeply disorienting territory, which leads us to step 6. If the building blocks of our reality, my body, my thoughts, the desk, are entirely dependent on each other, if they have no solid core, then what actually are they?
Nāgārjuna concludes that because the three spheres, the parts, the composing, and the wholes, are dependently arisen and empty of an independent core, they are like illusions.
Illusions.
The classical texts compare them to reflections in a mirror, mirages, dreams, or echoes. They are there, yet not there.
Let's use the echo. An echo in a massive space like the Grand Canyon. Conventionally, an echo is a very real acoustic event.
Right.
If I stand on the rim and yell, the sound wave bounces off the canyon wall and returns. It can literally startle a bird into taking flight. It functions. It has a real measurable impact on the physical world. But if I hike down into the canyon and try to grab that sound wave with my bare hands, I grasp empty air.
You can't hold a sound wave.
Exactly. I cannot locate its inherent core because it doesn't have one.
The echo relies entirely on the geometry of the canyon wall, the atmospheric density of the air, and the physical vocal cords of the shouter. It is an interdependent event, not an independent thing. When you rigorously analyze it, it dissolves into its surrounding conditions.
So my physical form, my entire sense of self, is an echo. It's an event, a highly localized intersection of food, genetics, environment, and time.
A beautiful way to put it.
But my psychology hates that. When my edge-detecting brain realizes that I am just a biological and psychological echo, it panics.
Yeah.
It desperately wants to build a new conceptual box to hide inside.
Nāgārjuna completely anticipated this psychological panic. And this brings us to step 7. To prevent the mind from building new philosophical boxes to hide inside, he forces us to apply a generalized version of the tetralemma to all phenomena.
The generalized tetralemma.
Yes. We must universally affirm that reality cannot be captured by any concept whatsoever. Reality is not this, it is not non-this, it's not both, and it is not neither for whatever this happens to be.
I have to object here because this completely breaks the fundamental rules of grammar.
It does.
Sentences require subjects and objects. You are telling me I can't say reality is existent or non-existent. I can't call it permanent or impermanent if I literally cannot categorize the universe using any noun or adjective without falling into delusion? How do I even order a cup of coffee tomorrow morning? How do I function in society?
The disorientation you are feeling is intentional. It is necessary to acknowledge that human language fundamentally fails when describing ultimate reality. Language is a conventional tool built specifically for that biological edge detection we discussed at the beginning.
It's meant for slicing things up.
It is designed to aggressively chop the seamless universe into discrete subjects and objects so we can manipulate them for survival. But the words are just pointers. The map is not the territory.
The word water cannot quench your thirst.
Exactly. You can still go to a cafe and order a cup of coffee. The barista will understand you, and you will receive a drink. You are using conventional truth perfectly well.
So I don't have to speak in riddles to the barista.
No, please don't. But Nāgārjuna is reminding you that when you say, I want a coffee, you are using an abstract, empty tool. You are not describing a fundamental, absolute reality. The danger arises when you mistake the menu for the meal and begin to believe that the word coffee contains an absolute essence.
But the human mind is so incredibly sneaky. When human psychology faces this total collapse of language, when it is told that absolutely everything is an echo and a mirage, it looks for a loophole.
Always.
And the loophole it usually finds is trying to tune this Madhyamaka philosophy itself into a shiny new religion.
This is perhaps Nāgārjuna's deepest, almost esoteric warning, found specifically in verses 8 and 9 of chapter 4. He issues a stark warning that the concept of emptiness is itself empty.
The emptiness of emptiness. This sounds like a riddle.
It does, but it's crucial. People often study this philosophy, realize that inherent existence is an illusion, and then they grab onto the concept of emptiness as if it is the new ultimate reality.
They make emptiness into a thing.
Yes. They treat emptiness like a giant, mystical, cosmic soup, or a divine background fabric that everything floats inside. But Nāgārjuna explicitly states that both dependent origination and emptiness are themselves dependently co-arisen concepts. They are merely therapeutic tools. They are words.
So if I read this text, go to a dinner party, and start arguing with people, using emptiness as my shiny new absolute truth to win debates and prove how philosophically advanced I am, I've entirely missed the point.
You've missed the entire point.
I've basically taken the medicine meant to cure my reification, and I've reified the medicine. I've turned the cure into a new disease.
That is the ultimate spiritual bypass. To reify emptiness as a metaphysical ultimate reality is to swallow the medicine and then choke on the bottle.
Wow. Choke on the bottle.
By rigorously proving that emptiness is also empty, Nāgārjuna pulls the absolute final conceptual floorboard out from under us. He leaves the dualistic, categorizing mind with absolutely nothing to grasp. He's pointing directly toward a non-conceptual, non-dual awareness that cannot be spoken, only experienced.
The floor is completely gone, which is terrifying, but also exhilarating. We have removed every floorboard. We have proved the universe is a centerless mirage.
Yes.
But tomorrow, my alarm clock is still going to go off. My boss is still going to expect me to hit my quotas. I am still going to get stuck in traffic on the highway. How do you actually navigate a high-stakes corporate meeting or a traffic jam if you know that the self, the boss, and the traffic are all empty echoes?
And this is step 8. The philosophical framework provides a specific navigational compass for this exact dilemma. The middle way.
The middle way.
The healthiest, most accurate attitude toward the aggregates and your daily life is the middle way, which remains entirely free from the extremes of eternalism, which is grasping at things as solid, permanent, and inherently real, and nihilism, which is falling into apathy and believing nothing matters.
So the middle way isn't just standing paralyzed in the center of a room doing nothing.
Not at all.
It makes me think of riding a bicycle. The middle way isn't a rigid, painted line on the ground that you have to perfectly trace. When you ride a bike, you are making dynamic, continuous micro-adjustments. You lean a little left, you correct to the right. You maintain your balance by moving continuously through a fluid, changing world.
That's a perfect analogy. You engage with the forces of gravity and momentum without rigidly locking your body into one unyielding position. This dynamic engagement leads directly to step 9, the concept of acting without acting.
Acting without acting.
We use concepts like parts, wholes, success, failure, spreadsheets, traffic laws conventionally to navigate life, but we never use them in absolute terms. We operate without attachment, without reification.
I like to compare this to playing a highly immersive, incredibly difficult video game like Elden Ring.
Okay, I follow you.
When you sit down to play, you strategize, you dodge attacks, you care deeply in a conventional sense about winning the boss fight. Your heart rate physically goes up. But when your digital character inevitably dies, you don't experience genuine existential trauma. You don't call a therapist because a digital dragon killed you.
Right, because you know it's a game.
Exactly, because you know the dragon is made of pixels. You know it's empty of inherent existence. So you engage fiercely with the conventional truth of the game while resting peacefully in the ultimate truth of its emptiness.
The classical Buddhist analogy for this delicate balance is the raft. The intricate philosophy of Madhyamaka, this intense logical reasoning we are analyzing today, is a heavy, sturdy wooden raft used to cross a raging river of anxiety and suffering.
It's a tool.
It is a highly functional and necessary tool. But once you reach the other shore, once you truly understand the emptiness of phenomena, you don't pick up that heavy wooden raft and carry it on your back through the forest for the rest of your life.
You'd be crushed by the weight of your own philosophy. You just leave the raft on the shore and walk freely.
Exactly.
So let's assume we've crossed the river. When you finally drop the raft, when you stop freezing reality into dualities and engaging your biological edge detection, what does the universe actually look like? How do you perceive it? This brings us to step 10.
The text describes the state of perception as primordial equality, or non-duality. In this liberated state of awareness, the mind perceives everything, every aggregate, every action, every object as primordially interconnected, pure, and one.
I need to flag that word immediately. When you say one, a modern Western brain instantly jumps to Moanism. I picture a giant, undifferentiated cosmic soup where my individual consciousness melts into the universe and all physical boundaries disappear into a hazy mush.
That is a critical and fundamental misunderstanding. It is non-dual, not monism.
Okay, what's the difference?
If the universe were truly an undifferentiated cosmic soup, biological existence would instantly shut down. If there were no conventional boundary between you and a dog couldn't bite you. Teeth could not pierce skin, food could not be eaten.
Because there's no other to interact with.
Right, so what does one actually mean, functionally, if it's not a giant souk? The oneness refers to the shared emptiness and the interdependent nature of every uniquely vivid thing.
Shared emptiness.
Think of a forest. Every single leaf on a tree is distinct. It has a unique shape, a specific color, a precise location in space. Yet every single leaf shares the exact same empty, interdependent nature. They are all expressions of the same underlying conditionality.
So they're uniquely themselves, but identically connected.
Exactly. You do not lose the vivid uniqueness of the leaf. You simply recognize that its uniqueness is entirely sustained by its connection to the branch, the trunk, the soil, and the sun.
It's the shared physics of the universe, not a blending of all physical matter into a featureless mush. And that shared physics brings us to step 11, the most mind-blowing mathematical extrapolation of chapter 4. Let's apply a fractal perspective to the parts and wholes we started with.
The fractal cycle. If we look closely at what we conventionally label as a part, an irreducible basic element, like an atom, we find that under scrutiny, it is itself composed of smaller parts, protons, neutrons.
And those are made of quarks.
And those are composed of quarks. It fractures infinitely downward. There is no absolute, solid, foundational bottom to reality.
And it works in reverse. The aggregate of my physical body, is simply a tiny part of a much larger collective whole. My body is part of my family unit, which is part of a society, which is part of a global ecosystem, which is part of the cosmos.
Right.
There is no absolute solid top to reality either. It's an infinite regression in both directions.
What this fractal cycle proves is that the concept of the isolated individual is a fiction. You are not a discrete, hermetically sealed container. You are not a separate ghost driving a biological meat machine through a dead, disconnected universe.
I'm not a pilot in a mech suit.
No, you are a highly permeable temporary node.
Cool. Yeah.
You are an intersection where collective and cosmic karmic processes meet for a brief duration.
Let's define karmic processes here, because pop culture has totally distorted the word karma into a cosmic point system of reward and punishment.
Yeah, it's not a scoreboard.
In this philosophical context, karma just means intentional action and the physics of cause and effect. Let's look at a farmer to understand this permeable node.
Let's hear it.
A farmer walks into a field and plants a seed. That physical action alters the landscape and the chemical composition of the field. The field then grows food. The farmer eats the food, which literally alters the farmer's internal neurochemistry, cellular makeup, and energy levels.
Right.
That updated neurochemistry then dictates the farmer's mood and their next action in the field tomorrow. The strict boundary between the inside of the farmer and the outside of the field completely collapses.
The inside is constantly becoming the outside, and the outside is continuously updating the inside. They are locked in a centerless, infinite feedback loop of co-creation. The environment creates the mind, and the mind shapes the environment.
Think about the staggering ethical extrapolation of that infinite feedback loop. If the boundary between self and other is just a conceptual hallucination created by our visual cortex to avoid tigers, then our entire understanding of compassion has to be completely redefined.
It does. It is the most profound and actionable consequence of Nāgārjuna's philosophy. Boundless compassion is no longer viewed as a polite moral chore. It isn't a religious commandment handed down from a deity telling you to be nice to your neighbor.
It's just physics.
It is the raw, ontological physics of reality.
Because if I am not inherently absolutely separate from you, then to harm you out of greed or anger is logically absurd.
Yeah.
If I harm you, I am causally injecting poison into the exact environmental and social fractal that will instantaneously loop back to update my own perception and my own life. I am poisoning the soil that grows the food that alters my own neurochemistry.
To harm another is quite literally to harm yourself, because the self and the other are co-arising nodes in the exact same interdependent web.
It fundamentally changes how we view human interaction. Take a literal physical example. The left hand in the hot stove.
Oh, this is a perfect example.
If your left hand accidentally touches a burning hot stove, your right hand doesn't pause to debate the moral ethics of helping. It doesn't look at the left hand and say, well, it's your own fault you touched the burner. Why should I exert the caloric energy to save you? You need to pull yourself up by your own bootstrap.
The right hand acts instantly.
It just pulls the left hand away immediately without a second thought because they share the identical interconnected nervous system. They're the same organism. When you truly, deeply realize the emptiness of boundaries, helping others is as natural, immediate, and devoid of moral grandstanding as saving your own arm from a fire.
And imagine applying that ontological physics to our modern structures. How does a justice system operate when a judge realizes that the criminal in front of them is an interdependent node shaped by the exact same societal fractal the judge participates in?
It changes everything.
How does a corporation behave when the executives understand that polluting a river in a foreign country is literally poisoning the cosmic web that sustains their own families?
It obliterates the illusion of the victimless crime. It obliterates the illusion of isolated success or isolated failure. Emptiness doesn't lead to a cold, dead, apathetic void. It leads to radical, boundless compassion and an inescapable responsibility for the entire interdependent web.
It forces us to see that every thought, every word, and every action is a ripple in a pond with no shores.
The scope of the journey we've been on today is absolutely breathtaking. We started by simply tapping a desk, craving that X-ray comfort of absolute binary boundaries. But we took Nāgārjuna's logical framework, we deconstructed the aggregates of our own bodies and minds, and we systematically shattered the boundaries of cause and effect using the tetralemma.
We discovered that the parts, the action of composing, and the wholes are entirely empty of inherent existence, yet they function flawlessly specifically through their dependent origination.
We realized that emptiness isn't a dark void, but the luminous breathing mechanism that allows the universe to actually function, adapt, and change. We saw that we are not isolated individuals, but highly permeable nodes in a centerless karmic fractal.
Yes.
And we found that the only logical response to this interconnected reality is the middle way, acting without acting and embodying a compassion that is driven by the very physics of existence.
It is a radical dismantling of how we perceive the world.
So I want to leave you with a final provocative thought. A puzzle to test this entire paradigm in your daily life tomorrow. We've talked extensively about how the mind imputes labels, how it creates these mirages to navigate the physical world. Tomorrow, I want you to look closely at the machinery of your own mind. Try to catch your edge detection in the act. In the exact fraction of a microsecond before your mind imputes the next concept, before it labels a sound as noise or a person as other, or a feeling in your chest as anxiety, what exists in that silent, terrifying, completely unlabeled gap? When you tap a desk, who or what are you in that pure space before the edge is detected? Watch the fractal engine operate in real time in your own life. Keep exploring and keep diving deep.